This example comes to us from a book called Chess Tactics for Champions, a step-by-step guide to using tactics and combinations the Bulgar way. It's White's turn to play, and we're looking for a fork, so we start off with Rook f6 check, gaining tempo on Black, King g7, and Rook b6 with the fork on the two bishops. And here Black has a choice of which bishop to lose. He could play bishop takes e4, check, or bishop d4. So I want to point out that in the book, this is just a series of various tactics, and they have solutions in the back of the book. And so the solution stops right here after Rook b6. But we're going to play this out to a win for White. So let's look at bishop d4 first. Bishop d4, Rook takes b7 check, King f6, Rook d7, with the idea of maybe coming down to the 6th rank and forking the king and the pawn. But what we really want to do is bring our Rook to d5 and put pressure on the a5 square. King e6, Rook d5, bishop b6, preparing to push the pawn anyway. King f3, centralizing our king. In the end game, it's a good idea to centralize your king, especially if he's not doing anything really important, because that's where most of the action is likely to be taking place. And even if it's not, from the center of the board, the king can get to other sectors of the board more quickly. Remember, your king is a slow-moving piece, and so if you have him down in a corner somewhere and something's happening way off in another corner somewhere, by the time your king gets to the action, it's likely to be over. a5 was played, and d4. So here we're counterpunching in the center with an advance on the wing. But really what's going on here is White wants to trade off a pawn. Why? Because White has a material advantage. And if you have a material advantage, in this case it's a rook versus bishop. Rooks are more powerful than bishops are. Trading off some pawns increases your advantage. So that's what we're doing here. If bishop takes d4, then rook takes a5, and we don't have to worry about that passed pawn anymore. And on e takes d4, then rook takes g5, and we see we have an additional passed pawn. So this is good for White. King f7, rook b5, attacking the bishop. Still need to keep an eye on this a pawn. That thing can become dangerous very quickly. Bishop d8, king e2, king e6, king d3, a4, rook b4 with an attack on both pawns. a3, rook a4, bishop e7. And so we've stopped the a pawn from advancing for now. We're threatening to capture the d pawn. But here's something to consider. Capturing the d pawn can be very dangerous because it opens up the long dark square diagonal leading all the way in to a1, the queening square for the a pawn. And this could add an extra amount of danger to us. So we need to be careful with this. So I think maybe it's okay to take the d pawn as long as we move our king into position to stop the a pawn. So let's look at king takes d4, bishop f6 check, king c4, king e5, and now king b3. So we're defending our e pawn, we're threatening the a pawn, king f4. So what's Black's idea? His idea is to go in and capture our h-pawn. So here I decided probably the best way to go here was rook takes a3, giving up the loose E pawn instead of allowing him to undermine our H pawn, which is defending the G pawn, which would considerably weaken our position here. So king takes E4, rook A5, with the idea of rook to F5. So once we get our rook on F5, we're going to lock that king out from any possibility of him going after our H pawn. So if he takes the time to move his bishop, it's game over for him. He's not going to be able to do much as far as going after the H3 pawn. But if he moves now to go after that H pawn, then he faces with the fork on his king and his bishop, and a loss of his bishop. So here black chose to go after the pawn and lose the bishop. King F3, rook F5 check, king G2, rook takes F6, king takes H3, and G5. So we see 3 more moves and we're going to have a queen. Black still needs to get out of the way of his pawn, clearing the H file. Then he's got 3 moves until it turns into a queen, but if you look carefully, you'll notice that our pawn will queen with check, so it gives us more tempo on the black king, and that means this isn't even really close. King G4, G6, H3, G7, H2, G8 queen, check, King H5, rook F7, H1 queen, and now it's all over because rook H7 is mate. So let's go back on move 2, where the 2 options were bishop D4 or bishop takes E4 check. So let's look at bishop takes E4 check this time. D takes E4, bishop D4, rook takes A6, king F7, rook C6, king G7, king F3, centralizing, king F7, just hovering around, trying to make sure we don't bring our rook over and snatch off that G5 pawn. King E2, bishop G1, with the idea of placing his bishop on F4 so he can defend both pawns with the bishop. King D3, bishop H2, king C4, bishop G1, king D5, bishop H2, rook E6, bishop F4. And now I chose to trade the rook for bishop and pawn. So rook takes E4, bishop takes, rook takes E5, bishop takes E5, king takes E5, king E7. So here we have a situation where black has taken direct opposition against the white king. And in a situation where it was only the white king and the black king and the 1 pawn on E4, this would be a draw. But unfortunately for black, there are other pawns on the board, and especially the G5 pawn is easily accessible to white. And here white can use his E-pawn as a distraction, go after the 2 black pawns, and then he's got 2 pawns to none, and that's an easy win for white. So knowing all this, after king F5, black chose to bring his king into D6. But this allows king F6, and we don't even need to capture the other 2 pawns because this is a winning position for white. King D7 and E5. And here if he plays king D8, we simply go king F7, and we're controlling the queening square, and we built our bridge, and that's going to win. On king E8, we take up opposition with king E6, king F8, and then come in with king D7. So now we've got our bridge, the pawn's going to queen, can't be stopped. King F7, E6 check, king F6, E7, king E5, E8 queen check, king F4, queen B8, and we're cutting the king off from direct access to our h-pawn. So king f3, king e6, king g2, and queen b3, just defending the pawn, and cutting the black king off from getting back out into the center of the board. King f2, king d5, king e2, king e4, king f2, queen f3 check, king e1, queen g2, and now he's restricted to the first rank. King d1, king d3, and on king e1, we simply play queen e2, mate. And on king c1, it's queen c2, checkmate. Game over.